Hey folks, I've talked about happiness in some of the other videos, and I wanted to cover some simple biofeedback tricks we can do to improve happiness. And I'm going to use this human brain book that I picked up at the library for some illustrations. So we're going to jump around in this book, and I'm not really planning on reading a lot from it, mostly just showing illustrations. So, as we all know, the world is a stressful place. And I make these videos to help folks relax. But also maybe educate, provide a little education here and there. So if you fall asleep for this short video, that's great, that's fine too. But if you happen to listen through, some of the items you might find some of it interesting, and the biofeedback actions could be helpful. So before I go into the actual biofeedback part, I just wanted to cover a little bit of some simple neuroscience. Our brain is made up of billions of brain cells called neurons. And these neurons send signals of an electrical pulse, and it goes down these little arms known as accumbens. And when it reaches the end of this arm, it squirts out a little chemical, and those chemicals are called neurotransmitters. And that neurotransmitter goes into the gap between neurons and known as the synapse, which is shown down here. And that's how all these neurons communicate, by sending signals. And that's kind of wild to think our brain is really just billions of these neurons sending signals from one to another. Electrical pulses that turn into chemical signals. And so these billions of interconnected neurons, they're organized in specific ways throughout the brain, called, specific regions. And then the neurons in those regions talk to each other, and then the neurons across regions or talk to other regions across from region to region. So we'll talk about a few of these regions applicable or associated with the biofeedback we're going to talk about tonight. So a lot of us have seen these kinds of diagrams where a chunk of the brain is shown to be responsible for a specific thing. And while it's not really wrong, it of course is simplified, and it can be the ways these brain's regions communicate can be quite complicated. And of course there's neuroplasticity and all that as well. But we'll talk about a few of the brain regions related to this biofeedback and how some simple actions we can take can affect these communications. So the first part of the brain, the two main parts we're going to talk about are the two, most the sort of largest two bodies of the brain, or aspects of the brain, are the thinking brain, prefrontal cortex, and then the limbic system, which is kind of deep down in the brain. And we'll talk about those two areas. So the prefrontal cortex, this part in green in this illustration, is the most recently evolved part of the brain. And it's as I said, kind of referred to as the thinking brain. But it's also involved in emotions. You could say it thinks about emotions. So that's the prefrontal cortex part. And then the other part that we're going to talk about is this limbic system, which there's a nice illustration of that, and that is the feeling brain, or it's right here. The limbic system is the feeling part of the brain, the emotional part of the brain. And in contrast to the prefrontal cortex, which is the most recently evolved, the limbic system is the most ancient collection of structures of our brain. Even early mammals, millions of years ago, have a limbic system. And there's a lot of parts to a limbic system, but we're going to talk about a few of the main parts related to this biofeedback. The first part is this hypothalamus, which is associated with stress. The amygdala, which is our fear and anxiety part of the brain here. The hippocampus, which is associated with creating memories, and for our purposes tonight, especially emotional memories. And the cingulate cortex, which is not specified out but in this illustration, but is up here. The cingulate cortex is closely connected to the prefrontal cortex. It functions as a gateway and filter between the limbic and prefrontal regions, so between the feeling brain and the thinking brain. It has a tendency to, or it tends to focus on it watches us like a devil's advocate, finds everything we do wrong, and seems to report on us. It's the Karen of our brain, you could perhaps say. It can cause us to focus on the negative. And then two other regions that we're going to talk about are related to this biofeedback that we're going to talk about are the striatum and the insula. The striatum can be thought of as our bad habit circuit. And it's sort of broken into two main parts. The upper part, the dorsal striatum, is part of that bad habits system, and the nucleus accumbens is the lower part of the striatum, and it's the partier of the brain. It's the reward system and is responsible for impulsive behavior. it releases dopamine whenever you do anything fun. And a lot of times in a book like this, when they talk about the nucleus accumbens, it's almost always talking about an addiction. I guess that's what it's most known for. In this example, they talk about a sugar addiction. Now, of course, we're not going to read this entire book, and even if you read this entire book, we're not going to become experts on everything about the brain. But, and in regards to that, the connections between all these brain regions is very complicated. So we're obviously presenting a simplified version of things here, but it's useful in practice when thinking about how this biofeedback works and how you can use it to help yourself. So a lot of times when we think about biofeedback, we're going to think about we're wired up to some machines and we're getting lights blinking at us or some other monitoring feedback that we're watching, and that's how it works. But the thing is, your brain doesn't need to be wired up. It already is wired up, and it's watching and sensing our sensations from all of our senses all the time, and then reacting to that. And it turns out you can impact the emotions created from those sensations by actively taking simple actions like smiling, taking deep breaths, sitting up straight. And that's really what we're going to talk about tonight. We've talked about some of the brain pieces. Now we're going to talk about some of the brain regions, and now we're going to talk about these simple actions and how they work to help improve happiness and calmness by how your brain senses those. Now we can go in the other direction, and you can inadvertently cause negative biofeedback, which can increase sadness and anxiety. But fortunately, we can also go in the other direction and increase feelings of calmness and happiness. And if your brain senses that it's supposed to be calm and happy, it will be calm and happy. And a big part of this is the vagus nerve. Now, this can start with a smile. And it's really that simple. Simply relax your face and let the corners of your mouth drift up. And that will start this biofeedback process. Your brain senses those muscles and says, I must be happy about something. And laughing has an even bigger effect. And one odd thing about this is it doesn't even seem to make any difference whether the laugh is sincere or not. Your brain simply senses those muscles, those facial muscles, and says, well, I must be happy about something. So that's thing number one, smile and laugh. The next thing is posture and confidence. So standing up straight or sitting up straight and opening your chest will tell your brain that you're confident. It will internalize positive thoughts. It'll be more decisive, and that will give you more energy. And behind the scenes, what's happening there is increased testosterone and decrease the stress hormone cortisol. And it's a similar kind of biofeedback thing. Your brain says, I'm acting confident. I must be confident. Good for me. And a second aspect of it is other people notice that confidence, and your brain will perceive those other people, those other reactions from those other people, and it will say, everybody seems to have an opinion about me that I'm confident. I must be pretty confident. And so sitting up straight and taking a confident posture will create confidence and increase calmness. The third thing is relaxing our face muscles. We already talked about that in terms of smiling, but there's more. A furrowed brow tells your brain that you're anxious or angry, and that can make you less happy. And this can work the same way as smiling. Your brain sees when these muscles are flexed and thinks you're upset or worried, but relaxing your forehead will help your brain feel calmer. And likewise, relaxing your jaw will also increase calmness. The next thing is breathing. And this has a big effect on those signals to that vagus nerve. And breathing is important in activating those circuits for resting and relaxation, known as the parasympathetic nervous system. It's the opposite of the sympathetic nervous system that controls the fight or flight response. So taking deep breaths activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which calms you down. And then finally, just generally relaxing muscles also has a positive effect. The facial muscles, as we've talked about, have the most effect, but relaxing other muscles also helps. And of course, sometimes we don't even know our muscles are tensed up. And one trick there is flex, hold, and then release and exhale. So take in a breath, flex, hold, and exhale. And that will release muscles that you didn't even know were tensed up. So, in summary, the biofeedback hacks that we can do are smile, sit up straight, take slow, deep breaths, and allow your face to relax. And then let the magic of brain biofeedback do its thing. I hope you found this little video relaxing. And if you stay to the end, you can try those biofeedback hacks. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.